What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. Weird things people ignore about Davy Crockett. Davy Crockett is unquestionably a national hero. It's a striking collective mental image. The brave Crockett, setting out into the wilds of Tennessee and the unknown and unexplored by European American settlers areas west, brandishing a rifle and wearing a coonskin cap. Or, there's the notion that he died fighting at the Alamo, one of the most legendary battles in North American history. Regardless, Crockett led a life filled with danger and adventure during the early 1800s, when the United States was undergoing significant and rapid change. When it comes to the remarkable life of Davy Crockett, it is difficult to distinguish fact from fiction, mythology, or lore due to a combination of self-promotion and contemporary accounts of his accomplishments that may have distorted the truth for political and entertainment purposes. Much of the common knowledge about the 19th century celebrity, statesman, frontiersman, and warrior was perpetuated by movies and TV, and there are a lot of lies about Crockett floating around. However, Crockett's actual life was documented enough that we're able to determine and pass on some of the more curious, harrowing, and altogether baffling moments. Here are some things that unequivocally really did happen in the life of Davy Crockett, and they sure are weirder than anything that's been part of the so-called official record passed down by biographers and filmmakers. He was born in a state that isn't real. While he'd come to be strongly associated with the region of the United States where the South meets Appalachia, Davy Crockett wasn't born in either of those states. At least, not according to his politically active family, he wasn't. In August 1786, Crockett was born in what's now eastern Tennessee, but which at the time was considered part of Franklin, a proposed U.S. state that never happened. The far-flung residents of isolated western North Carolina decided to create a new state in 1785, based almost entirely on the single issue that doctors and lawyers were too intellectually different from the common man and shouldn't be allowed to serve as legislators. People in the region desired that the proposed new state impose that restriction. Contingents from the 13 colonies cast their votes, but the threshold didn't meet the required two-thirds majority. The state of North Carolina refused to recognize Franklin, which had trouble assembling a necessary militia anyway, and absorbed it in 1789, right around Davy Crockett's third birthday. An attack on a schoolhouse bully went terribly awry. Davy Crockett began attending a rural school in Franklin County, Tennessee, when he was 13 and on his father's instruction. Crockett found it to be a terrible experience almost from the beginning, one that would force him to leave his home much earlier than he had intended. In Davy Crockett's own story as written by himself, he recalled, "I went 4 days and had just begun to learn my letters when I had an unfortunate fallout with one of the scholars, a boy much larger and older than myself." Crockett decided to wage a one-person anti-bullying campaign on his unnamed attacker through the act of preemptive self-defense. "I concluded to wait until I could get him out, and then I was determined to give him salt and vinegar." On the appointed day, Crockett hid in some bushes by the side of the road near the school, awaiting his bully on his evening walk home. After a while, he and his company came on sure enough, and I pitched out from the bushes and set on him like a wild cat. I scratched his face all to a flitter jig, and soon made him cry out for quarters in good earnest, Crockett wrote. Davy Crockett fled his home. After his bully was defeated, Davy Crockett considered the consequences of his actions. Crockett used to hide in a nearby wooden area for several school days because he was afraid his teacher would physically punish him for his retaliation. When a note about his truancy reached Crockett's father, he once again feared physical violence at the hands of an adult. Threatened by a beating at home and likely one at school, where his bully remained at large, Crockett didn't go back to school as directed but ran away instead. I then cut out and went to the house of an acquaintance a few miles off, who was just about to start with a drove. His name was Jesse Cheek, and I hired myself to go with him, Crockett wrote in Davy Crockett's own story as written by himself. Crockett's family was unaware of his whereabouts as he worked as an itinerant laborer for nearly 2 years. He claimed that some members of his family initially didn't recognize him when he returned home at the age of 15. He was really good at hunting bears. The 5-part miniseries Davy Crockett aired on ABC's Disneyland anthology series in 1954 and 1955 and was so popular it started a Davy Crockett fad, with Americans buying up truckloads of coonskin caps and sending 3 different versions of the theme song The Ballad of Davy Crockett into the pop chart top 10 simultaneously. That song made the ludicrous claim, which was taken as fact, that Crockett was such an adept and fearless outdoorsman that he once killed him a bear when he was just 3 years old. There is no reliable historical evidence to suggest that Crockett fell prey to a massive wild animal as a child. There's not even a discussion of it in the braggy 1813 autobiography Davy Crockett's Own Story as written by himself. In his book, he claimed to have killed 10 bears in a single spring when he was a young frontiersman. Crockett was invited to hunt on an acquaintance's vast, bear-infested property toward the end of 1825. Crockett wrote, "He said they were very fat and very many, and I knew that when they were fat, they were easy to take because a fat bear can't run fast or long." He claimed that Crockett and his 8 dogs successfully killed 15 bears in 2 weeks. According to his count, Crockett had killed 105 bears during the bear hunting season. He could have died in a boat crash. Davy Crockett started making barrels in 1825 after losing an election for the Tennessee legislature. He oversaw the construction of wooden parts called staves and sent them down ships in the Mississippi River to be sold in New Orleans. In the spring of 1826, after leaving the operation to go on his bear hunting spree that left 105 animals dead, Crockett agreed to personally escort his crew and its cargo of 30,000 staves on the journey to market. After an uneventful opening salvo on the smaller Obion River, the boat hit the choppy and aggressive waters of the Mississippi River, and Crockett learned that the ship's operator barely had any piloting experience. The crew became enraged, and another ship let Crockett attach itself for additional safety and direction as the boat continued to tremble down the Mississippi River. That made for 2 unsteady boats, and Crockett retreated into a cabin to sulk. As he was inside, the overhead hatch broke down, sealing Crockett in the chamber. Immediately after, the 2 lashed-together boats hit the underwater portion of a small island, causing everything to sink. Crockett was rescued by his crew, who pulled him out of a small hole in the wall of a cabin, removing all of his clothing as they did so. There were no casualties in the accident, but all 30,000 staves were destroyed. Life for explorers in the Wild West was tough, and Davy Crockett's adventures therein didn't become such an indelible and thrilling part of the American canon of history and lore until well after they happened. Due to James Kirk Paulding's 1831 play The Lion of the West, Crockett's frontier set episodes, hunting excursions, daring face-offs, and inspiring self-sufficiency were not well known to the general public until the 1830s. Crockett had served as a state legislator in Tennessee and won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives by the time that theatrical work was first performed at the Park Theater in New York City. A barely disguised portrait of Crockett during his early years, The Lion of the West concerned a brave and daring fellow named Colonel Nimrod Wildfire, portrayed by acclaimed stage actor James Hackett. As the entertaining play filled a theater every night, the demand for The Lion of the West stoked interest in the inspiration. 2 years after the play's long run began, the first of many truth-stretching Crockett biographies was published, Sketches and Eccentricities of Colonel David Crockett of West Tennessee. He was a very skilled fiddler. There's a difference between the fiddle and the violin, and Davy Crockett was evidently a master of the former, or as it was known on the early 19th century frontier, a devil's box. He was known to have taken his instrument on long voyages into the wilderness as well as into battle. According to written accounts of Crockett's final days at the Battle of the Alamo in 1836, he provided the Texans with comfort in the form of familiar old folk songs as they fought Mexican troops' attacks or entertained them with danceable songs during down times. Crockett was a performer on the violin, and often during the siege took it up and played his favorite tunes. Battle of the Alamo survivor Susanna Dickinson said in The History of Texas from its first discovery and settlement via True West magazine. Historical sources say that Crockett played the fiddle in his final moments, though this could be apocryphal. After General Santa Anna ordered the last captured defenders killed, his buglers performed their execution song called El Degelo. Crockett allegedly launched the Tennessee March at that point. Davy Crockett loved all kinds of Betsis. Davy Crockett was often the subject of portraits and other paintings during his lifetime, and he was frequently shown holding a shotgun. Any of those guns may have been identified as Betsy, a name Crockett bestowed on his favorite firearms more than once. As a gift commemorating his time in the Tennessee State Assembly in the 1820s, Crockett received from his supporters a flintlock rifle that he called Old Betsy. Betsy is an affectionate and diminutive version of Elizabeth, a name shared by both one of Crockett's wives and one of his sisters. It is still unknown, nearly 2 centuries later, which woman Old Betsy was named after, if any. The same can be said of another of Crockett's most treasured guns, Pretty Betsy, although some records say it had been named Beautiful Betsy. That one, a cap rifle, was given to Crockett by Whig Party officials in Philadelphia in 1834. Crockett trusted both firearms, but because he considered them to be significant personal heirlooms, he gave them to associates before departing to fight alongside other firearms at the Battle of the Alamo in 1836. He played up the outdoorsy image. Form a mental picture of Davy Crockett, and it's one of a rugged outdoorsman in the woods or the mountains, a fur cap on his head as he explores the wilderness or fights a bear. Due to popular entertainments like the 1950s Davy Crockett television series and Crockett's own cultivation of it, this is the popular conception of Davy Crockett. When the intensely successful 1831 play The Lion of the West first made Crockett a household name, he was well into his 40s and long past his days as an active explorer and voracious hunter who set out into the wilds of Tennessee for big chunks of time to give the people what they wanted, which was the Crockett depicted in and mythologized by projects like The Lion of the West and his own autobiography. Crockett posed for portraits in the trappings of his youthful conquests. He'd hold up a rifle so he could be painted that way, or surrounded by dogs, or in the midst of a staged scene that looked like he was hunting. By speaking out in favor of indigenous people, he sabotaged his career. Davy Crockett was an ally and supporter of Andrew Jackson when he was elected president in 1828, having fought alongside him in the Creek War and the War of 1812. Following the passage of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which was supported by Jackson, Crockett abruptly withdrew his support. That action was the cause of the Trail of Tears, an appalling and harrowing moment in American history in which indigenous people were forcibly evicted from their land. In his 1831 bid for a third term in the U.S., Crockett ran for the House of Representatives using anti-Jackson rhetoric. However, the people of Tennessee were very fond of the president and his policies to expand the country for European Americans, and Crockett lost his seat in Congress. He returned to the House as a member of the rival Whig Party in 1833, and he continued to oppose Jackson's methods. Crockett was once more kicked out of the House of Representatives by voters in 1835. Davy Crockett saved Andrew Jackson's life. In 1835, Davy Crockett was serving out what would be his final 2-year term in the House of Representatives. On January 30th of that year, he was among the attendees of a state funeral on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol building held for the late representative from South Carolina, Warren Davis. President Andrew Jackson and Crockett, one of his primary and most outspoken political adversaries, attended the solemn event alongside him, despite their contentious and antagonistic relationship with Congress at the time. Richard Lawrence, a potential assassin, emerged from the mourners and observers and opened fire on President Jackson as the group of powerful politicians left the building and passed the East Portico. Or at least he tried to shoot the sitting president. The target and his associates were able to subdue the attacker because Lawrence's 2 pistols malfunctioned at the time. Witnesses say that Jackson, in poor health and needing the aid of a cane at the time, used that walking aid to give Lawrence a thorough whacking. Crockett, on the other hand, put aside any animosity he might have had toward Jackson and his policies in order to do everything in his power to stop Lawrence from carrying out his assassination attempt. United States Navy Light. Thomas Gedney. Crockett physically overpowered Lawrence and helped get Jackson safely into the carriage and whisked him away to safety. It's not clear how he died at the Alamo. Davy Crockett was so embittered by his final electoral loss that he left Tennessee entirely in November 1835. According to Texas Standard, he stated, "I will go to Texas. You can all go to hell." At the height of the Texas Revolution, which was fought between the Mexican government, which claimed the land, and American slaveholders who desired independence for the region, He traveled to the disputed Southwestern Territory. And that's what the Battle of the Alamo was really about. Crockett moved to San Antonio in February 1836, swore allegiance to the Texas Republic, and was given the task of defending the Alamo. About 200 soldiers and their allies were killed when Mexican General Antonio López de Santa Anna's forces stormed the fort just a few days after Crockett joined. Crockett's death has left a lot of unanswered questions about how and when he passed away. Joe, an enslaved man who was the only adult who made it through the Battle of the Alamo, testified that he saw the distinctive body of Crockett among the dozens of other war dead. Then unconfirmed reports of Texans surrendering to Mexico appeared throughout newspapers of the day, counting Crockett among that contingent. A Crockett biography after his death, Colonel Crockett's Exploits and Adventures in Texas, found to have taken great creative liberties with the story, popularized many myths about Crockett, and also claimed that Crockett was shot after his capture and safely into the carriage and whisked him away to safety. Davy Crockett is unquestionably a national hero. It's a striking collective mental image. The brave Crockett, setting out into the wilds of Tennessee and the unknown and unexplored by European American settlers areas west, brandishing a rifle and wearing a coonskin cap. Or there's the notion that he died fighting at the Alamo, one of the most legendary battles in North American history. Regardless, Crockett led a life filled with danger and adventure during the early 1800s, when the United States was undergoing significant and rapid change. Due to a combination of self-aggrandizement and contemporary accounts of his achievements that may have stretched the truth for entertainment and political purposes, it's hard to separate truth from fiction or mythology or lore when it comes to the spectacular life of Davy Crockett. Much of the common knowledge about the 19th century celebrity, statesman, frontiersman, and warrior was perpetuated by movies and TV, and there are a lot of lies about Crockett floating around. However, Crockett's actual life was documented enough that we're able to determine and pass on some of the more curious, harrowing, and altogether baffling moments. Here are some things that unequivocally really did happen in the life of Davy Crockett, and they sure are weirder than anything that's been part of the so-called official record passed down by biographers and filmmakers. First off, most people don't realize Davy Crockett was born in a place that technically doesn't exist. While he'd come to be strongly associated with the region of the United States where the South meets Appalachia, Davy Crockett wasn't born in either of those states. At least not according to his politically active family, he wasn't. Crockett was born in what is now eastern Tennessee in August 1786. At the time, this area was thought to be part of Franklin, a proposed U.S. state that never became a reality. The far-flung residents of isolated western North Carolina decided to create a new state in 1785, based almost entirely on the single issue that doctors and lawyers were too intellectually different from the common man and shouldn't be allowed to serve as legislators. People in the region desired that the proposed new state impose that restriction. Contingents from the 13 colonies cast their votes, but the threshold didn't meet the required two-thirds majority. The state of North Carolina refused to recognize Franklin, which had trouble assembling a necessary militia anyway, and absorbed it in 1789, right around Davy Crockett's third birthday. So yes, Crockett was born in a ghost state. Additionally, he had a flair for drama even as a young man. At the age of 13, Davy Crockett was sent to school at the insistence of his father. He only lasted a shockingly short time there. Crockett recounted in his autobiography that he had a run-in with a much larger schoolmate, and fearing continued bullying, he decided to ambush the boy like a wildcat. He hid in bushes, leapt out, and scratched the older kid, all to a flitterjig, causing the boy to cry out for mercy. Sadly, Crockett became terrified of returning to school, where he assumed he would be punished as a result of this vengeful act. So he did what any impulsive teenager might do in the wilderness. He ran away from home. For 2 years, Crockett disappeared into the frontier, working as an itinerant laborer and driving livestock for wages. His family assumed he had passed away, possibly even died. When he returned at age 15, his own family barely recognized him. He wasn't just a dramatic runaway. He was also a teenager who lived off the land and practiced survivalism long before Instagram made that kind of lifestyle fashionable. Another thing people overlook is just how insane his bear-killing record was. When Ballad of Davy Crockett came out in the 1950s, Americans adored it, especially the part where he said he killed a bear when he was just 3 years old. Although Crockett boasted in writing that he once killed more than 100 bears in a single season, this is almost certainly not the case. In particular, he claimed that during a particularly successful hunt, during which he was frequently accompanied by his loyal hounds, he killed 105 bears. In his account, fat bears were easy targets because they couldn't run fast. This absurdly high bear body count is either a massive exaggeration or an indicator that Crockett was operating on a level of wilderness savagery that would terrify even modern big-game hunters. The weirdness continues. In 1826, Crockett nearly died in a river accident while escorting 30,000 wooden barrel staves down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. His crew joined forces with another boat for stability, except both crews were made up of amateur sailors. As Crockett sulked in a cabin, the connected boats hit an underwater island, capsized, and began sinking fast. Trapped in the cabin, Crockett was rescued only after being yanked, completely naked, through a hole in the wall. One of the few times a man has survived both drowning and embarrassment at the same time. The cargo was lost in its entirety. And while he's known as a frontiersman, few people realize that Crockett was also one of the earliest victims of viral fame. He was the subject of a hugely successful play called The Lion of the West, which exaggerated his persona as a bear-hugging, gun-wielding, forest-roaming wild man. The play's popularity led to a boom in Davy Crockett biographies, most of which were barely factual. Crockett didn't discourage any of it. He played up the persona for political gain, even posing for portraits in hunting gear long after his exploring days were behind him. He wasn't just a character in pop culture. He helped invent himself as one. Crockett's musical side is one of the more wholesome but still bizarre aspects of his legacy. The man was a gifted fiddler. His fiddle playing at the Alamo is documented in multiple historical accounts.